I get the extreme privilege of introducing you guys to one of my favorite accounts on Instagram. So today we're going to be talking to Jon Hamilton from Infinite Grit. Now, Jon is a former Green Beret who now helps coach other individuals who are looking to get into special operations. So today he's going to share with us some of the things that you need to know in order to be successful at selection. And once you get on a team, what do you need to do in order to show value as the new team guy? We're also going to be talking about body fat percentage. Is there an optimal body fat percentage that you should be trying to get to before heading off to selection? So stick around. We're going to talk about all of that. I'm Susan Lopez, Tactical Dietitian, and this is the Tactical Nutrition and Performance Podcast, where we help tactical athletes bridge the gap between nutrition, metabolism, sleep, stress, and training so that they can perform better and live longer. Jon, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you here and dive into this conversation today. Go ahead and tell our listeners today a little bit about yourself and what is the mission and the vision behind Infinite Grit?
I got out of the Army in January of 2023. I was in 10th group. Originally started, in the 160th, went to selection, transferred over to SF, all that good stuff. And it was, I started it just, answering questions. Guys would ask questions about programming, things like that. I've always been in the fitness, I guess, obsessed with fitness. Been a, personal trainer for a while now. So I started just answering those types of questions, and then it kind of morphed into building the coaching program, and then brought some guys on, TSAC guys, and then one of them is going for his master's. The other one's going for his doctorate right now. So they're kind of like the subject matter experts in regards to strength and conditioning. And then I leverage, obviously, the regular NASM personal training, things like that, but a lot of my experience and going through the pipeline and what has worked well for me and what works best for our clients. So we pretty much, every coach has their own methodology and little tweaks to programming. So we do a lot of split testing and comparing what is working against, different metrics for individuals that fit those different avatars, and then just optimize the program as we go. So yeah, it's kind of morphed into this whole team of coaches thing and kind of something bigger than I expected it to be, but having a lot of fun with it.
And I think I saw in one of your recent posts that you do maybe some in-person events and things as well. Is that something that you're starting up, or part of the community that you're building? Is that something that you guys do pretty regularly?
Not yet, but it is something that we want to do. So I do in-person training just in the mornings in a limited capacity. But we've ran a couple in-person events, kind of one challenge event, and then we're leaning into more of the land navigation. So we had a couple guys from the community that were local to Arizona and wanted some land navigation, practice. I was like, why don't you guys just come up and we'll drive up to the mountains and go do some camping, grilling out, and then do some land nav practicals, kind of run them through what to expect at selection, a lot of route planning, terrain association, things like that. But it's not something that we have turned into kind of like a recurring event. But in the future, we want to kind of travel around and offer those things first and foremost for the members of the community. So we kind of have pockets of the members. We have, quite a few military personnel, so we can travel around to different bases or the areas around those bases and then offer that land nav, maybe get a workout in, some type of challenge, and then kind of build the community through, that in-person connection. So it is something we want to lean into more in the future. Haven't really had the time yet, still figuring out how to manage everything without working 14 hours a day. But once we kind of get that thing nailed down, then we can kind of free it up and start incorporating those more. We're actually down in Arizona. So my wife and I are down in Arizona, and then our other coaches are down in College Station, Texas. And then they help coach the Texas A&M Ranger Challenge team over there. So kind of bounce back and forth. And then next month I'm headed out to Texas and going to spend some time out there.
So tell me a little bit about like what is your mission over at Infinite Grant? Like what is your mission? What's kind of like your vision for what you're wanting to achieve?
Yeah. So um, our most our biggest goal is to enable individuals to live the lives they want, right? Whether that's in the military, whether that's in law enforcement, whether that's in firefighters. We have police officers, both domestic, international. We want them to be able to go out and perform their jobs at a high level without training the way that typically people in those environments train, where you start breaking down your body and then you get to the end of your career and your backs hurt, your knees hurt, things like that. So our focus is on building strong, durable, bodies that can withstand the pounding of these types of career fields, and then come out of them feeling good and able to live a fulfilling life. So that is our number one mission. We have a lot of individuals who are training up or on the front side of SFAS, SFRE, RASP, things like that. I would say that makes up about half of our clientele. The other half are in those environments, or coming out of them and wanting to just build up their overall durability. So our focus is on strength and conditioning, but a lot of guys that come to us have those nagging injuries, and we really try to get them to a point where they can perform at those high levels without those nagging injuries.
Yeah. And I know we have a couple of specific things that we were going to talk about today, but I'm going to throw a couple of ad lib questions at you if you're cool with
Yeah, of
that.
course.
Yeah, so since we're on the topic of really trying to get guys from, the beginning of their career through mid-career and getting them through the end of their career, hopefully not in poor shape when they come out so they can kind of live the second half of their life. What are some common mistakes that you see these guys making at different stages of the career that leads to some of those situations where they're in rough shape by the time that they're ready to retire or get out?
The number one thing that we see, two things. First one is putting way too much of an emphasis on lifting. Obviously, lifting is a big component. It's a big component of our training, but guys get fixated on hitting these max, like 1 rep max numbers, and trying to hit this 500-pound deadlift or 500-pound squat. And the biggest thing that I preach to our community, the people that follow us on social media, is the gym is a tool that enhances our ability to perform outside of it. So lifting, we want to, obviously impose, like, lift heavier weights, impose the rule of progressive overload, but we don't want to get so fixated on trying to hit a specific number that we have a breakdown in form, and then end up developing injuries outside of it. So that's the number one thing that I've seen, both going up through the preparation, going through selection, going through those environments that I see, is guys trying to just do way too much, instead of just prioritizing consistency, prioritizing obviously like full range of motion, even with the running and rucking, like an actual progression, and then having a little bit of patience with their performance, instead of trying to just jump up and weight very quickly. That leads to a lot of breakdown, that leads to a lot of injuries. And even in the SF environment, I'm sure you see it, down in Ranger Regiment, guys, there's a lot of egos and there's a lot of ego lifting. It's cool that guys push each other and things like that. But when you're in an environment that requires you to perform at a high level physically, even a small injury that, something, you strain something pops, whatever, from putting way too much of an emphasis on hitting this 1 rep max, causes a lot of lasting injuries. And in these types of places where it's always go go go, you don't get a whole lot of downtime, or sometimes it can be hard to kind of take a knee and let that heal up. So then the injury just gets worse over time, and then obviously ends up developing further issues down the road. So that is one of the biggest things I see. The other is with the running side of it, is just not having a progression, or guys train like they're in selection, just doing way too many miles, just putting up way too much weight on their back. They're or just like foregoing the progression as a whole and then developing those nagging injuries associated with it, shin splints, Achilles tendonitis, all that good stuff. We could get into the whole realm of lack of recovery and poor nutrition, things like that. But typically, the one that is the most simple fix for those guys is changing the way that they view preparing or training, and instead of getting fixated on those numbers, like understanding the purpose behind a specific session, and building off of that. So that's probably the biggest one that we see, which is a mistake that I made when I was going through too. When I was, the 18-year-old, I went to selection at 22. So when I first started preparing for selection, I did the same stuff, right? I increased my mileage too quickly, got Achilles tendonitis. I tried to lift too heavy, hurt my back. Like I made all of the mistakes. So one of our biggest goals is to just share the lessons learned and those insights from the mistakes that we made. So, the next generation going through doesn't make them, and they can obviously perform much better than we did.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's, every unit is different, but there's definitely going to be those individuals who, they're going to be really talented in one area, or maybe focusing a lot of their time in one area. So like those 1 rep max deadlifts, but then maybe they're not really focusing on work capacity, and so there can be kind of sometimes an imbalance, or I'll see it the opposite, where you have these individuals who have like just great VO2, just running all the time, but then they don't have a lot of strength, and so as soon as you put them under load, they just fall apart.
Yeah.
So I think mentioning that you really need that balance in your training is important, and I think for individuals who don't have a background in strength and conditioning, if you're not working with someone who can smartly program that for you, it can be very easy to get into a state of overtraining.
Yeah.
Especially because when we look like at athletes at that level, your soft guys, your rangers, your green berets, right? And even beyond that, it can be very easy to get into a state of overreaching or overtraining because unlike the gen pop, it's very easy to outwork your calories in a lot of different training scenarios. Even just on a day-to-day basis, most of these guys who take their physical performance seriously are going to be training probably twice a day.
Yeah. Yeah. And you brought up a good point. Outpacing your calories is another issue that we typically see is once we get guys in and start looking at what they're eating, we often find that they're simply not eating enough, right? That is a huge um, issue, a very common issue, I would say. But yeah, in regards to the training aspect, I think it breeds an environment where individuals think they need to be doing way more or way more complicated training than what it actually takes. Whereas, prioritizing consistency, training with intensity is the way to get there. So a lot of it is simplifying, and then kind of just removing that guesswork from the noise of social media and obviously the internet today, saying like how much you need to be doing, and in reality it's much more simple than most people really think.
Yeah, and the patience that you mentioned, that's really important. And then also just like the mental aspect of, maybe you have gotten to a place where you're injured or you're dealing with some nagging injuries, or worst case scenario, you have, kind of a catastrophic injury, or now maybe you're in a boot, maybe you have a rod shoved up your leg. Maybe you're having to have like multiple surgeries. And that can be really difficult for someone who has a high performance mindset, has never really had to pump the brakes before. And I think it's really common also just to see people they either seem to do really well and buy into their rehab process, or they just kind of fall apart, right? And for those individuals who experience that, what are some ways, I don't know if you've experienced any injuries yourself, but what are some ways that somebody who's injured, maybe going through the rehab process, can mentally kind of get themselves through that?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is demonstrating the patience that we talked about and understand that there's going to be times, especially in a time where you're going through like rehabbing an injury, that taking time off is going to be the way in which you get to that level of performance that you want to reach the fastest. So one thing I talk about a lot, and this is, again, where I ended up when I started developing these injuries when I was that 20-year-old kid. But I talk about something I call like the cycle of the plateaued athlete. That's where someone starts to overtrain. They think they need to be doing all of this stuff. They develop those nagging injuries, so they take a little bit of time off, not as much as they need, and then they feel like they're behind. So then they bump up the volume when they try to come back or when the injury heals up a little bit way too quickly, and then the injury comes back, and they just go through this cycle, staying at this plateau in their performance. So it's super common, and I think having the patience and making sure that you actually heal the injuries, and then when you are reintroducing the running, rucking, lifting, things like that, you go back into a progression instead of diving in where you currently were or thinking or trying to be where you think you should be. And that's, I think the biggest thing that separates, a mature athlete or tactical athlete from someone that's a little bit more immature in the world of performance, is just understanding that progressions are the fastest way to get there, and long-term, performance and consistency is ultimately the only way to get to that high level of performance.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna, from a nutrition standpoint, I'll just throw in a quick plug too, because I see this a lot is when athletes will sometimes intentionally then start under eating because they're concerned about their body fat increasing and seeming to not understand that, hey, like in this time, this is the time when you potentially need more calories,
Right.
or at least to hit your maintenance calories, get that micronutrient support in there, get that mineral support in there, so that whatever's happening in your body, so it can heal, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have those nutrients coming in, you don't have those calories coming in to support the healing process, then it can seriously slow down your return to duty.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I
Mm-hmm.
completely agree. And I think from in that space, again, especially, I'm primarily focusing on the younger demographic, going into or on the front side of those careers. I don't think there is a big enough focus on nutrition. Um, Guys typically train very hard and they take their training very serious, and then they kind of eat whatever they want, and they have no idea, even relatively, how much calories they're taking in, where their maintenance calories roughly is, or what that even looks like. So yeah, I think absolutely from a recovery standpoint, it's a time to even get more serious about it than when you're training feeling good. So yeah.
It can be a limiting factor for sure, not just in the recovery process, but just in general performance. And I'll say this, there's a lot of guys that I work with where, we don't even necessarily need to count calories. We really focus on, hey, are you just eating the right foods at the right times around your peri-workout times or your peri-workout nutrition, and just making sure that they're hitting some certain markers throughout the day. So, I mean, you can make it as complicated or as simple as you want. I think it really just depends on the person. But I want to dive into the things that I kind of mentioned to you earlier today. I'm actually going to play this clip. This is the one that really got my attention. And I was like, you know what? I need to contact Jon. I need to get him on the podcast so we can have a conversation around this. Because this, I think, is really common too. So I'm going to play it.
10% body fat looks cool and gets lots of likes on Instagram, but there is a huge difference between going out and performing for a couple hours versus performing for a couple days or even weeks at a time. Those that are between 11 and 15% body fat, depending on the individual, usually strike a better balance between speed and the endurance needed for longer duration performance. So start using the performance metrics from your training sessions to drive your nutrition requirements a lot.
So you talked about the best body fat percentage for tactical athletes and where the focus should be in regards to your body fat percentage versus performance. So let's dive into that a little bit because I think a lot of people do get fixated on their body fat percentage, and there's definitely a lot of people who believe that your body fat percentage is tied to your athletic performance, and definitely your weight can have an impact on metrics like VO2 up or down, but there really is no body fat percentage that's necessarily tied to high performance. So I just want to get your thoughts on that and what prompted you to post that. And let's talk about it.
Yeah, so it stemmed primarily from many of the questions I get, which typically my content does. If I see patterns and questions that I'm getting, I'll typically make a video addressing it. And the questions I was getting is guys thinking that they need to be way more lean than they need to be. And I think it stems from social media as a whole, especially with like the rise of the hybrid athlete. You'll see a lot of these guys who are primarily bodybuilders or come from a bodybuilding background. A lot of them are taking all kinds of different stuff. They look very good on the internet, and then they started running a couple months ago, and now they're posting videos about how you can be 7% body fat and or you can, but how you should be 7% body fat and how to maintain it, blah blah blah. And it leads individuals in the tactical athlete realm or training for selection, stuff like that, to believe that to perform best for endurance, they need to get to this absurdly low body fat percentage, and it's just not true, right? It obviously depends on the individual. Everyone has that kind of optimized zone for their performance. I'm typically around 12%. That's where my run times are best. That's where I have a balance with the strength. I can carry load, manage load, recover well, sleep well, regulate temperature, those types of things. But it doesn't, there it's not important to drop down to sub 10% body fat and um, look good, but you have to think about like what you're actually training for. And if you're training for an environment where you're going to be performing for weeks at a time, or you're going into the Q course, or you're going to be performing for months at a time, and you have to sustain it, you're going to develop injuries, you're going to be carrying a load, you're going to have to recover, things like that. Then it's not a good idea to get fixated on becoming super lean so that you can see, every ab and every striation in your body. So that's kind of where it stemmed from, and kind of wanted to squash that and make guys feel like, or make guys think about more about their performance metrics and less about what they look like in the mirror. Because what we're training for, obviously, the performance metrics, being able to perform in the environment under load, under stress, in austere environments is much more important than seeing an ab or two pop out in the mirror.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of put some statistics behind that, right? So when we look at different body fat percentages across different units, I think in one article I read, Navy SEALs typically going to be somewhere between 15 to 18%, right? So much higher than single
Right.
digit body fat. I will say Rangers usually between 12 to 15%. If we look at Green Berets, I worked in a unit where the average was 18%. And then when we look at individuals who are preparing for selection, and we're talking about 7% body fat, you're going to have to expect that going through a selection process, any type of assessment process, you're going to lose some additional body fat because you're going to
For
be in
sure.
a hypocaloric environment and you're going to be just pumping out calories and you're just not going to have a lot of calories coming in. And so this is immediately going to lead to additional body fat loss, also some lean muscle mass loss. And if you're rolling in at 7% body fat, okay,
Yeah.
just to give you another example, I was part of a pre-dive course where I was doing the nutrition for those guys and kind of just checking in on them periodically, doing body comp measurements. And over a 3-week time period, we saw on average where these guys would lose about 3% body fat. Most of them would maintain their lean muscle mass just in a 3-week period, right?
Wow.
But we had a really controlled nutrition environment. They could still eat a ton of food. We were bringing them breakfast every morning. We were bringing out sports supplementation for them. They could still go home every night and eat like a regular dinner, like a massive dinner. Not that it mattered because a lot of them lose their appetite by day 4. But we were just trying to feed him as much as possible, right? And so you're not always going to get that in a selection environment or an assessment environment. And so just think about that. If you're 7% body fat and within 3 weeks you lose 3% body fat,
Yeah.
you know, where's that going to put you? Well, it's going to put you down into those essential body fat ranges. And then you start just falling apart. Mental
Yeah. Yeah.
acuity, mm-hmm. Yeah,
The
physical
the potential for
performance.
injury goes way up, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just talk a little bit about your experience, like maybe going through the course or selection. The guys that perform the best aren't always the leanest guys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I was joking about it with my friend CJ, who's a strength and conditioning coach with us. He's a higher body fat percentage. He's one of those guys that's more typical Green Beret, up around that 17-18%, but he runs an 11:42 mile. Like, it's, it doesn't directly translate to it, but you see a lot of guys in all different shapes and sizes. And that's why I'd say it really comes down to the individual, their body type, where they perform at the best. But for the guys going into those selection environments, again, you got to think about what you're actually doing. A lot of times guys get so fixated on that initial 2 mile run that they think, having a 12:42 mile versus, being super lean and having a 12:15 2 mile is going to be the difference between them getting selected or not. And it's not the difference. What I always tell guys is being, super fast, both with the 2 mile run and the ruck, really only gets your foot in the door. And then you have weeks of walking with a heavy pack on your back through the woods, tripping in the middle of the night, obviously getting the team week and carrying absurd loads on your back. So you have to have the durability to get through that, right? So I think it probably stems one from what they see on the internet. These guys that are doing, essentially the hybrid athletes who are going out and running a single day event like a marathon, which does not compare to a selection environment, or thinking that because they run, 10, 15, 20 seconds faster when they're at a significantly lower body fat percentage, that's going to be the difference that gets them selected. Instead of prioritizing durability, having solid numbers with your run and rucks, and obviously, but really prioritizing the ability to last in that environment, which is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're in that single digit body fat, that's going to be so much more difficult.
Yeah.
All right. And definitely, we want to talk about just something else that's kind of been popping up in my feed recently. We're kind of going to move away from like maybe the physical training and the nutrition piece of the selection process. And I'm going to play another clip here for us. And in this one, we're going to be hearing a little bit about the 18 X-ray program. And I thought this statistic was really interesting. So I'm going to play this for us now.
The 18 X-ray program is a fantastic program, and 18 X-rays make up more than 50% of our force now. And that is a good thing. They are keeping us healthy. They are keeping us moving forward. They are super fit. They're super smart. They're super motivated, but they're inexperienced.
So that was Major General Ferguson, so the commanding general of 1st SFC, which is the command over Special Forces groups, talking about the 18 X-ray program and how 50% of Green Berets essentially are coming out of that program right now. And they're coming in super fit, but super inexperienced. So maybe you could talk a little bit, for those who don't know, what the 18 X-ray program is, if you're comfortable sharing your thoughts around that. And then let's talk about, some of the things that if you're coming in with no military experience, what you can do to maybe set yourself apart, but also just be a good team guy. Yeah, and I think that's an important point to bring up is it does bring in a lot of guys who maybe wouldn't join otherwise. And I think, having that life experience, that's kind of a story that resonates with on our family too. And so, if we've looked at kind of, okay, I'm into selection, I've made it through selection, even going to the Q course, I make it to a team as the new guy on the team. What am I doing in order to make sure that I'm providing value to the team that I'm on? What are some of the mindset things that I need to be thinking about coming in?
Yeah, the biggest thing I always say, and this goes for your performance in selection, this goes for showing up to a team as a new guy, is just looking for work, right? One, you always hear about, you'll hear guys say, like, when you show up to the team room, just keep your mouth shut, just listen. That is true to an extent, but you also want to look for work and provide value where you can. If you have, like if you come from a background, maybe a guy worked in IT before joining the military and there's a problem, one of the echoes is having a problem with the system, then he can interject and help and look for work and actually provide value. That is the best way to kind of blend into a team. And I'll kind of share a story. There was, uh, we had multiple new guys kind of come to the team. And one of the times we had two new guys come to the team at once. One was a Echo, one was a Delta. The Echo was a little bit more reserved, but he still spoke up when it made sense. But he constantly looked for work. He constantly provided value. He would stay, until the last guy on the team left the team room at night, and he was helping. And he was kind of, interjecting or helping where he could. And the other guy kind of had that almost chip on his shoulder, like, hey, I'm a Green Beret too, like, and kind of had that ego associated with it. Had to be like the smartest one. And they're both good dudes. Both went on to have successful careers. But looking at the first couple months of them on a team, the one that wanted to demonstrate how smart he is and have all the answers and stuff like that had a very rough time. Whereas the other guy on the team who simply looked for work, was humble, communicated with respect, things like that, was integrated into the team immediately. And we were thankful that he was there. So I think, in special forces as a whole and special operations, I mean, probably in life, all right. I think the best thing we can do is look at how we can provide value to a situation. I get a lot of questions about how to prepare for team week. Guys are nervous going into it. Obviously, how you communicate, how your interpersonal skills, how you work in a team is a huge contributing factor to it. And it really comes down to looking for work. One of the biggest things I noticed in regards to special forces, like during my time in special forces versus like my time being out of the military, is in special forces, if you get up and you start working on something, if you start even like sweeping the team room, you start going down there, organizing the wall lockers or organizing the weapons, whatever it is, like you will have kind of dudes just like trickle in and everybody will start pitching in and helping without even being told. Whereas in other environments, you might start working on something and then other people kind of just watch you do it. Don't be the guy that watches people do stuff. If you see someone doing something and you're not doing something, then ask or figure out how you can provide value. And that's the best way to integrate into that environment.
Yeah, I'm glad that you provided specific examples, but the overreaching message there, it sounds like humility and
Yeah.
just be a team player.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
To simplify it, yes, humility and being a team player.
Yeah.
Um,
I think people sometimes need to take a step back too, right? Because I think we all have like it's okay to have a high opinion of yourself, but I think coming into any new situation, you have to definitely have that humility. And even if you feel like you know more than everybody, right? Nobody likes the smarty pants. Uh,
yeah,
to
exactly.
to put
Exactly.
it lightly, right? And there's going to be, even if you have a lot of value that you can give to the team, you have to also pay respect to the experience that's on the team. Because just because you think you know the right answer doesn't necessarily mean that that is the right answer.
Right. No, absolutely. And in that guy's case, I have no hard feelings against the new guy that came on. So if he ever watches this, but when he came into the team, it was identified very quickly that like this guy is very intelligent. He does know his stuff, but the way he goes about it and the way he communicates it, nobody wants to listen. Nobody like
Yeah.
gives him the time of day. So it is, kind of knowing the time and place for those types of things, and it involves a lot of intuition, and that's kind of the intangibles that they look for.
Yeah, you got to work on those soft skills too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I appreciate that, John. I think a lot of what we talked about today was really interesting, really valuable. I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of it, and I'm super excited to introduce you to anybody who's following me who hasn't given you a follow yet. So, if you guys aren't following John and his team over at Infinite Grit, make sure you head over there and hit the follow button. John, if somebody wants to work with your team, where can they find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, easiest way to get in touch with us is just Instagram. Shoot us a message. We'll have a conversation first and see if it's something that we can even help with, and if it makes sense for both of us, and then we'll move forward and talk about what that looks like. But yeah, just shoot us a message. That's going to be the easiest way. But no, I really appreciate you having me on today. I've been watching your content for many months now, and you put some good stuff out there, and I really appreciate everything you do.
Oh, I appreciate that. Hopefully, we can grow together and keep putting the good information out there. So, thanks, John.
Absolutely.